I'm Tammy Dennett, ex-Target workplace bully turned communication coach. But it wasn't that long ago when I lacked the skills, the tools, and the knowledge to ditch the drama, confidently handle difficult conversations, and create better relationships. Fast forward past many failed attempts and lessons learned, and you will see the business that I have today. One that is helping others just like you to find the confidence and peace knowing you can change your circumstances one conversation at a time. I created the Dissolve Workplace Conflict Summit to give you access to industry leaders who are sharing simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies so you can do the same. If you are an employee, supervisor, or an employer and you are looking to access the top strategies to successfully dissolve conflict without damaging your relationships, then you, my friend, are in the right place. Today, I'd like to introduce you to Amy Castro. She is a leadership and team development expert, speaker, author, and blogger. She brings her communication expertise combined with 20 plus years of business experience to help you conquer your biggest problems, including hiring the right employees to serve your customers and how to attract and retain lifelong customers. She knows how to help professionals like you solve your biggest problems in growing leaders and teams and getting customers to stick to you like glue. Today, we're going to be talking about conquering conflict. Overcome your natural tendencies for effective conflict resolution. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me as part of the summit. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. I almost tripped over the conquering conflict because that's actually what I used to call my Facebook group. And I was like, wait, is that my name or your name?
Yes, I know. Every time I think I've got a great idea, somebody else has already got the title. So what can I say?
Isn't that true? But I was like, I hoped I didn't I thought maybe I put something in there by mistake. So
Nope.
awesome. And I'm really happy we're going to talking about how to do this because we do have a natural way to respond and react. And we want to be able to sometimes shift that into a different direction. So before we start that though, why don't we share with our listeners how you got into this area of work?
Well, it was the training and speaking aspect kind of came from my Air Force experience. I did public relations for the Air Force, and oftentimes it wasn't good news that we had to do public relations for. So the concept of dealing with others in conflict situations and stressful situations, and how can you use your own good communication skills and maybe overcome your natural tendencies. My natural tendencies, I was used to be kind of a conflict avoider. I did not like getting up in front of people and speaking, and had to overcome all of that and realize that once you do and you can make it out on the other side, it's amazing how much more you can accomplish and how many more choices you have and how to handle situations.
So it sounds like your growth in this is kind of really born out of you started in this role and you had this job and it was kind of almost required of you to find a way to overcome this.
Definitely. I really, I joined the Air Force willingly. It wasn't like I was drafted, but, I would have done just about anything, at least in the beginning, to avoid getting up in front of those groups in those difficult situations. So, but it was required as part of my job. And so you learn, and it's really like with anything else, you learn to overcome those natural tendencies, but the only way you're going to do it is to put yourself in those situations.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to be uncomfortable and you're going to make mistakes in the beginning, and that's all part of the process.
I think there's a lot of people who would share that same feeling, like, I just don't want to do it and I will do anything else but, so please task me somewhere else.
Right, exactly.
So you've talked a little bit about your own natural tendency in conflict. What are the other types? Because you mentioned that you were a little bit of an avoider, wanted to get away from it. Are there different types of tendencies that people have?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's basically 5 different types of approaches that we have as human beings to conflict. Um, Interestingly enough, we've all probably heard the terms fight, flight, right? So that's, as animals, and all animals have that basic conflict instinct to either fight or flee. And our instinct as humans to avoid or to fight, or, we call it competing as an approach to conflict, is kind of naturally occurring with us. And then oftentimes our personal environments, how we were brought up, what behaviors your parents encouraged or discouraged, will reinforce those natural tendencies. But the other 3 styles of communicate of conflict resolution come from the fact that we can communicate as human beings. A gazelle who is in conflict with a lion doesn't have the ability to stand on his little hind hooves or whatever they have, I suppose, and put their little hooves on their hips and say, look, let's negotiate this. How about we compromise, which is a third style of conflict? How about you only eat one leg, but leave me with the other three? They don't have that ability, but we can do that as humans. We can compromise. Or even better, we can come to a collaborative discussion to say, hey, I don't really want to be eaten at all, but I understand you're hungry. How can we fix both of those situations? So those are the developed skills that we have. And then that fifth skill is a version of avoidance. It's what's called accommodation, when people will just kind of give in to keep the peace. They might have a desire to not necessarily avoid, but all the hinting and the hopeful looks aren't getting them what they need. And so it's like, okay, I'll just do it. I'll just say yes, even though I don't want to. Mm-hmm. So the accommodator is kind of another style. So, and what's interesting is we do have natural inclinations, and they're not necessarily just one. Sometimes we adapt based on the situation or the person that we find in, and that's a good thing to have that adaptability. Not too many situations in life are you going to be successful just taking one conflict approach and saying, this is the way that I am, and I'm going to make it work. It's not going to work in every situation.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that most people have a dominant lean towards one particular area, and then they need to develop an awareness as to how to work within one of those other domains?
Yes, you're exactly right. Oftentimes I'll use an assessment as a tool for people if they don't already know, although instinctively I think they do. Sometimes we don't want to admit what our dominant characteristic is, but yes, you have what I call your go-to style. That's the thing that I instinctively want to reach for to handle situations. But if you've taken the time to, like you said, acknowledge and develop the skills to do something else, you can take that step back and say, okay, I could do this in my natural instinct. This is what I think I want to do, but it might be better if I take this other approach. Try this first. The beauty of conflict styles is if one thing doesn't work, you can always switch to another, whether it's within that same situation or in the next one. Like, hey, I didn't get my way in this one. That didn't work. Next time I'm faced with this situation, I'm going to try something different. What's a challenge, though, is for the people who have not learned the different styles and the pros and cons and how to employ them, that when they turn around to reach for that tool, there's only one there, or maybe one or two. And that makes life kind of difficult when those are the only choices. I like to have lots of choices, to choose just the right tool based on me, the other person, and the outcome that I seek.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really important piece to showcase, is that, you mentioned that we kind of learned this from growing up with our parents and our peers, and there's no course outline that tells you that you're right now learning the assertive style, or you are right now learning how to accommodate. And so understanding the label we put upon ourselves is probably one of the first steps to being able to identify where we can then grow. Would you agree?
Very true. Very true.
Mm-hmm. And then with that, I think when we're reaching for that one tool and we don't really even know what it is half the time, that's probably a source of conflict that can go unresolved if we don't actually stop to take a look. So how does one person start to bring that awareness into their relationships?
Well, I think being aware of the basic characteristics that go along with each style. For example, if I am a natural avoider, I will notice that anytime something comes up that could potentially hasn't even become a conflict yet, but it could become a conflict, and I'm already looking for a way to get out of it, get away from it, change the subject, avoid that person who I think might be upset with me because they looked at me in a certain way. And so being able to recognize that discomfort that you're feeling and how you're trying to get away from that discomfort, instead of where a competitive person would be Tammy's upset with me. She gave me that look in the meeting. I'm going to charge down to her office and I'll say, what is your problem, Tammy? You gave me that look and you meant this, and there's a lot of this going, which, gee, you wonder why that starts a fight. Well, because you're just basically, aggressively pursuing something. So I think, starting to identify those characteristics. And I think also noticing too, like, I find that when I talk to people about conflict outcomes and I say to them, what do you think, what's the goal that you should be shooting for when it comes to a conflict? If you're having a conflict with another person, what are you looking for as an outcome? And a lot of times they'll say compromise, right? Mm-hmm. Compromise. We just need to compromise. Well, the very definition of compromise is you give something up, I give something up, and we're both okay, which there's nothing wrong with that in some situations, but is that optimal? And a lot of times I'll use an example, like, let's say that it is my family likes to watch zombie movies. So it's the zombie apocalypse has hit and there is one last can of soup left. And you need 100% of the calories in that soup for your survival, but so does the other person. And so you both split the can of soup and you both die. That's a compromise. So compromise is a lose-lose outcome in some situations, depending upon what the situation and what the problem is. So I don't think people should look at compromise as the ultimate. I mean, ultimately, if I had to pick an ultimate, and what I strive to do in overcoming my natural tendencies is, what's the collaborative outcome? We've heard the term win-win. Is there a way that we can work together so that you get what you need? And notice I say need, not want. You get what you need, I get what I need. And so, do we split that can of soup and we both die? Or do we seek out other food because we both need 1,000 calories to get through one more day? That's the difference. But that takes effort, and it takes skill, and it takes work, and it takes you cooperating with me, which we sometimes, and that's why I said, the idea about switching modes. Not everybody always wants to collaborate. Sometimes they want to compete. Sometimes they want to avoid, and, we have to work through that as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of context people bring to conversations that we don't see, did they just have a run-in with somebody and the energy was really bad and they wouldn't normally be assertive, but now they're all of a sudden really heated with you and you don't know how to deal with this. So there's so much that we don't know that's coming into our conversations.
Right.
So what would be a tip? Let's go back through those 5 styles. If I was an avoider, what would be a tip for me to start to lean into a different style to help decrease the conflict so that I can become a little bit more participative in these conversations?
Okay. I mean, I think the first thing would be to look at the outcome of avoidance. So let's say, for example, I've got a colleague that's being rude to me, just, condescending or rude or disrespectful, whatever it is. And I avoid bringing it up, mentioning it. What's going to happen? Is that going to magically go away? No. In fact, research backs up, and we all know from personal experience, it will not only continue, but oftentimes it will escalate. And I think, another thing for somebody that's a true avoider, I mean, a true avoider is somebody that's not, inclined at all to assert. So you've got to do that incrementally. So if you've got this really aggressive, difficult coworker, I wouldn't start trying to be assertive with that person. I would start as an avoider in a small, relatively safe situation. And one of the examples that I give a lot would be, you're standing in line at the grocery store or wherever, and somebody cuts you in line. That might be the time to see what happens if I say something. So what happens if I say, excuse me, I was next? You got a 50-50 chance, right? Somebody's either going to say, I don't care, and they're going to get upset. And I know that I've got a 50-50 chance, so I need to be prepared for that. Mm-hmm. But guess what? And this is the thing that avoiders don't realize, is that you've also got a 50-50 chance, in reality, a much higher chance that somebody's going to go, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And they're going to let you go. Because most people, when they're faced with assertion, will respond appropriately. It might take them a try or 2 tries, but when you get out there and you start using it, people are usually pretty responsive.
I love that you suggest start in a safe place and one where you've got a really good odds to see the positive result, but also to be prepared that it may not go your way. I think that's a part that people need to kind of emotionally prepare for. Like, okay, I'm going to say something. I may end up in the same place I am right now, but I can also maybe actually elevate this. So,
Well, and sometimes there's, in changing to becoming a more assertive person, if you're an avoider, there is power in opening your mouth and having the say. Even if it doesn't work out, you at least had your say. You
mhm,
brought it to the attention of that other person. I can't control that other person's behavior, but I stood up for myself. And that's being assertive. I stood up, I said what needed to be said in the most polite and respectful way I could. And if that person didn't respond, it's them, it's not me. But if I sit back and say nothing, then it is me.
mhm,
I'm
absolutely.
responsible for that outcome.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so that's our avoiders. Then there was an accommodator. What would an accommodator do to try to stretch into a different style?
For an accommodator, a lot of times it's the same thing, because the root of accommodation is similar to why people avoid. It's the fear of being assertive.
Mm.
The difference between an avoider and an accommodator is an avoider is has been told has gotten the message so much that other people are more important. That it's you sacrifice yourself for other people, you give in to keep the peace, you're a better person if you look out for other people instead of yourself. So their level of and a lot of times when we look at conflict, we look at the 5 styles from a level of how assertive or not assertive, how cooperative or how not cooperative. And accommodators very cooperative. They're going to say yes, 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 yes. Um, and so one of the things that accommodators can do is stop saying yes to everything. And if you don't want to say no, then say, let me see, and I'll get back with you. If you want to buy yourself some time to think about how you want to respond, that's another thing that an accommodator can do. But, the automatic yes, or automatically giving in when you face resistance. If I said to you, hey, like I did today in doing this recording, I bumped the time up because my schedule got changed. And so, if you had said, well, that's not the time that we agreed to, I can be accommodating and say, you're absolutely right. Or if it's super important to me, then I might say, well, you know what, Tammy, you're right. That was not the time that we agreed to, but is there any way that we can compromise? Maybe do it a little bit earlier. So it's being ready to try again, not giving up after that first resistance, because human instinct is resistance oftentimes, especially when when people are faced with change or doing something that they don't want to do, or even in the situation with the person cutting in line, faced with your own flaws or your own mistakes, or being pointed out to you. Your gut instinct is, no, I don't want this. And so the accommodator needs to be ready to just try that one next step. Oftentimes that will get you going.
I love that. And saying no is really hard, even for non-accommodators. There's, a certain level, I think, of social acceptance to say yes and to help other people that I think we all struggle with saying no at some point in our lives. And I love the idea of just buying yourself some time and saying, hey, can I think about this and get back to you? It's kind of like a transition step to saying what you truly want to say.
Yeah, there's so many different ways to say no, and it doesn't have to be that, nope, don't want to help you. It doesn't have to be negative. It could be buying time. It could be telling somebody, hey, as soon as I get my to-do list done, then I'll see if I can help you with that. So it doesn't have to be an absolute no, but
Mhm.
it's certainly, you don't want it always to be yes, especially when yes is not the right answer for you or the other person. You're not doing anybody any favors saying yes to something that you're not going to possibly be able to follow through on.
Mhm. Or if it's going to make you miserable, it just causes resentment in the relationship. And then you're going to start to avoid. Oh no,
Exactly.
they're going to hate me
Exactly.
again.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so avoiders and accommodators. And then we talked about assertives, but is there one in between?
Well, you've got the compromise, which is the person that's just going for the quick fix. And the quick fix to compromising is, yes, you can always compromise, but is there something better?
Mhm.
You've got the competitive person. The competitive person's constantly looking at things as being a win-lose. And so that person has plenty of assertion. They're just not particularly cooperative. And so somebody that does lean towards competition, just changing the mindset that I can still get what I need without that person necessarily having to give something up. Let's try that more collaborative approach. And oftentimes competitive people have a certain style. They have that lion style. It's loud, it's in your face, it's, this is the way we're going to do it. And learning to recognize that those behaviors are intimidating, that, you might win, the old saying, win the battle, lose the war. So you might get cooperation on the surface from that accommodator, but yet they're going to fail you in the end because they really shouldn't have said yes to your request. So, being able to maybe take a step back sometimes in that body language and tone, and that very over directness can help with competing.
Yeah. What I like about that is, so I feel like I'm a direct person. I don't recognize sometimes how my directness is being perceived on the edge of passive aggressive, I've been told, or bully kind of behaviors. Definitely not the intention, but I think sometimes we don't know. There's a theory about the water in which the fish swims in. I forget what it's called now, but they don't actually know what they're carrying with them. They can't see it, but somebody else from the outside is in a perfect position to give you some feedback and say, hey, you may not know this, but every time you bring this to me, your tone of voice suggests that this is the only way to do it. And it comes across really, what would the word be? Dominating, right? To get that feedback. And so as a dominant person, as someone who's comfortable talking, I don't even know that sometimes that's how it's received. So being open to that feedback.
Yes. And I think, relationships are a two-way street when it comes to this stuff. Like you said, I may not be aware that that's the way I come across. I've always been that way, and nobody's pointed it out to me until this point. Or I know for me, I was born and raised in New York. And when I moved from New York to Texas, where I live now, people do have a different communication style. And so my very direct nature was not always perceived as I intended it. And so being able to adapt your style to the people that you're interacting with is an important aspect of the skill. And like you said, being willing to give the feedback to people and then being receptive of it. And it's okay that, maybe you did hear, if I hear feedback from one person, then I will become aware of the need to make that change with that one person. But if that's the only person in my entire life I ever hear that from, then do I really need to change everything? Because so much of this can be perception too. One person, I used to give a little quiz in workshops, and and it was in writing. So there was no, nonverbal or, voice elements or anything that went along with it. But the statement was, please put this in the mail this afternoon. And then the responses were, was that, aggressive? Was it passive aggressive? Was it assertive, or was it non-assertive? And people would label that as aggressive. And it's like, I said, please, like, what is it about saying, please put that in the mail this afternoon? If I'm your supervisor and I say, hey, please put that in the mail this afternoon, it's not, I don't have to ask a question. I'm not, assertiveness doesn't mean I say, can you do it? Because what happens when the person says no? If I need you to do it, and that's my right to ask you to do that, I'm just going to say, this is what I need. So it's, perception plays a lot into how people receive it and how people are sending out their messages, for sure.
Yeah. And you just introduced a new topic there about the email communication and how your style can actually come through those, intended or not.
Right.
You're right. The perception is in, like, I own how I perceive your email, and that's based on all the context that we can't see right now, based on how I feel about you from our last interaction, maybe. But that it can come through in communication and in ways that you didn't intend, which can be a huge source of conflict in the workplace. I have helped many a staff member. They would go, look at what our supervisor just sent me. And I would read it. And I'm like, from my perspective, that's actually a pretty benign email, but what are you seeing in there? Just to see what they're getting from it. All right. So when it comes to becoming more assertive and being able to participate more wholly in these conversations, is there one strategy that's better than the other, or are they just kind of individual characteristics to consider?
I think it starts with identifying where you are, so that the gap between where you are and where you want to be. I think also realizing that all of these styles exist for a reason, and there's not one of them that is wrong given the right situation. So yeah, avoidance. If somebody's putting a gun to my face and says, give me your wallet, I'm going to avoid all conflict and I'm going to hand it over. I'm not going to try to negotiate, discuss, say, hey, well, tell me first what you really need. You're not going to do that. Avoidance is completely appropriate given certain situations, but it's not necessarily something you want to use all of the time. I think if I had to give one thing, I would say if we would just, when we perceive a conflict, or if we want to open our mouths and discuss a situation, a problem that we're having, to start from the mindset of the win-win. That it's not about me getting my way. It's about, me sharing my needs, me understanding the other person and where they're coming from, and then problem solving it together to come to an outcome we can both live with.
Yeah.
That would be, it takes time. It takes more effort than some of the other approaches, but long term, your outcomes and your actual resolution is going to happen, not just a quick band-aid fix and then it crops up again in a couple of weeks because you didn't solve the real problem.
And I think collaboration is a newer perspective in terms of resolving conflict. We used to always look at the compromise, and compromise is a dirty word for some people because of that loss. They feel like they have to give up something. And so for those who are maybe transitioning from that style of leadership or that style of communication where we're looking for the compromise and they have a conversation, they get the compromise, how do they then go from that to say, hey, let's circle back and let's try to get to this next level?
You kind of hit the nail on the head with your question is
Okay.
Acknowledging that is an option. The compromise is an option. Can we do better? And a lot of times it starts with before, I try to, if I'm having a conflict discussion, I try to identify with the person in advance. So I might say, hey, Tammy, I want to talk to you about the problems that we've been having with scheduling our lunch hours. Do you have some time on Friday to talk about, what you've been seeing, what challenges are you facing, and how you'd like to see this resolved? So if I let the other person know this is what I want to talk about, and I give them some time to plan and think about it, and then I do the same, then we can go into that conversation with some ideas. And the ideas that come out might be compromise ideas, but we can always in our problem solving process say, okay, that is an option. Is there something better that meets the ABC need that I expressed and the XYZ need that you expressed? What are some other things we could try? I think sometimes we need to push ourselves for more creative and more effective long-term solutions than just the quick fix so we can get this conversation over with, which is, I think, a lot of times why we compromise. It's, we feel like it's such an uncomfortable conversation. We just want to get it over with so that we can not ever have to have this happen again. And that's, it doesn't have to be an uncomfortable conversation, because I'm not talking about you. I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about our needs and where we're, kind of where we're trying to go. And if we kind of decentralize that from us as humans, it's easier to look at it objectively when it's a problem that we're solving versus I'm trying to get you to do what I want, or vice versa.
So much value in that last little bit there. I mean, just giving people time to consider the topic so they can come in fully engaged and prepared to have a conversation. I don't know if that happens as much in the workplace as it needs to happen. So much it's like, hey, I need to see you in my office. And you're like, I'm going to the principal's office, there's already
Exactly.
tension. So I love setting them up for success by giving them the framework and some time. I love that if you're, initially focused on that compromise, that you can ask that question, okay, we're here now, but can we do better? How do we actually get more out of this for both of us? I love that question.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. So you're going to offer our listeners a free conflict style assessment. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So I have a conflict style assessment on my website, and I think we can make that link available. Is that how we'll do that?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's just a quick starting point for, it's 11 questions giving you 11 different scenarios, and how you respond will help you identify that go-to conflict style. And when you get your results, you'll also see some tips for, because again, there's strengths and then there's challenges with every style, and appropriate times to use it and maybe not the best times to use it. So you'll get some tips on how to, employ your style, but also maybe bring in some of those collaborative skills as well.
I think that's brilliant. So if we were to summarize today, we talked about knowing what your style is, figure out who you are when it comes to conflict resolution, and actually name it and identify what those strengths and weaknesses are through this assessment. Sounds like a great tool. Learn to lean into some other different styles and practice some new ways of communicating so that you can close that gap, and strive for the collaboration, the win-win.
Yeah, that's a great starting point for anybody that's looking to get better outcomes, for sure.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining us today, Amy, and sharing your zone of genius around conflict resolution and how to become a little bit more assertive so that we can all get what we need.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun and I appreciate it, and I hope it's helpful for everyone that was here.
I know it will be. And that's an official wrap on this session of the Dissolve Workplace Conflict Summit Speaker Series. Now be sure to connect with your favorite speakers by clicking on the link below and taking advantage of the free resources that they are sharing with you so that you can dissolve your conflict without damaging your relationship. Now be sure to head on over into the Facebook group Dissolving Workplace Conflict and give us your favorite takeaways from today's session using the hashtag Dissolve Workplace Conflict. I can't wait to see what you've learned.